welcome to debate. So on April 12th, 2015, a 24-year-old murdered his wife, and he did it specifically to avoid leaving the United States.
Right.
But then less than 12 hours later, he just, completely vanishes, to the point where the FBI thinks he might have immediately fled the exact same country he just killed to stay in.
It's just this massive structural paradox, honestly.
Exactly. We're looking at one of the most baffling contradictions in modern criminal history.
Yeah, you have Bhadreshkumar Patel. He's a guy working at a Dunkin Donuts in Hanover, Maryland, who brutally kills his 21-year-old wife, Palak, right in the back room.
Just awful. And the catalyst for the violence?
Well, their visas had expired. She wanted to return to India, and he adamantly wanted to stay in America.
Right.
But somehow, this absolute amateur, with no apparent tactical training, steps out of that donut shop, right, into a modern surveillance state, and successfully evades an international manhunt for nearly a decade.
And he is currently sitting on the FBI's top 10 most wanted list.
Yeah, he is.
So the central friction point today, the reason this case completely divides investigators and analysts, is whether Patel successfully utilized international smuggling networks to cross a border and escape entirely.
Right. Or whether he's just hiding in plain sight, deeply embedded in the domestic underground economy.
Exactly. And I'll be arguing that looking at the logistics of his flight in those critical first hours and the sheer impossibility of surviving a digitized America with $1 million bounty on your head, I argue he successfully executed an international escape.
And I look at that exact same set of facts, particularly the psychological driver of the crime and his final confirmed location, and I reach the exact opposite conclusion.
Okay, let's hear it.
I'll argue that his movements demonstrate a calculated effort to remain exactly where he wanted to be, within the United States, shielded by a highly insulated, localized network that operates completely outside the traditional data grid.
All right, well, let's jump straight into those friction points, because the mechanics of those first 12 hours are just uniquely frustrating.
Oh, definitely.
If we trace his steps right after the murder, they point directly to an international flight risk. He walks back to their shared apartment in Hanover, changes clothes, grabs his passport, and takes whatever cash he has.
Right.
Then he hires a taxi, but he doesn't just go a few towns over. He pays for a 200-mile cab ride across state lines from Maryland to New Jersey.
Yeah, all the way to Newark.
Exactly, to a Best Western right next to Newark International Airport at 3 a.m. in the morning. To me, that is the blaring alarm of an international extraction plan.
But wait,
I mean, you don't take a multi-$100 cab ride to sleep next to an international runway unless your immediate intent is to board a plane, or at least meet a syndicate contact who's going to put you on one.
Okay, wait, but you have to look at what he actually does the following morning. It completely contradicts the idea that the hotel was a staging ground for a flight.
How so?
Well, if his goal was to jump on a plane out of Newark Liberty, the terminals were right there. I mean, he could have walked or taken a 3-minute shuttle directly to the departure gates.
Sure, but
at 10 a.m., he checks out, boards the hotel shuttle, and explicitly goes the opposite direction. He heads away from the airport and gets dropped off at Newark Penn Station.
Which is a massive transit hub, yeah.
Exactly. And that's why I view that airport hotel stay not as an extraction point, but as a decoy, like a deliberate data note.
A decoy?
Think about the situational awareness he has in those first frantic hours. He knows Palak's body is going to be found by a coworker at any moment.
The clock is absolutely ticking, yeah.
Right. So by taking a cab directly to an airport hotel and checking in under his own name, he creates a highly visible digital footprint. He practically draws an arrow pointing to the sky.
Trying to draw attention to the airport.
Exactly. He wants law enforcement to think he's flying. He wants the FBI freezing federal airspace and scrutinizing international passenger manifests. And while federal agents are hyper-focused on the airport, he steps off a shuttle at a train station and drops into the domestic rail network. None of those transit modes require the biometric dragnet of an airport. He anchored himself to the domestic grid.
It blows my mind that we are projecting that level of tactical brilliance onto a 24-year-old. I mean, this is the adrenaline-soaked aftermath of a brutal, unplanned crime of passion.
You think it's giving him too much credit?
Way too much. I don't buy the decoy theory at all. He wasn't some trained intelligence operative masterminding a diversion. He was a panicked young man running on raw instinct.
What?
I really think he went to that airport hotel because he fully intended to fly out. But while he was sitting in that room for 7 hours, the reality of his logistical nightmare set in. He realized he couldn't just walk up to a ticketing counter.
Right, because of the visa issue.
Precisely. This is the crucial mechanical barrier. His visa had expired a month prior, in March 2015. He was officially out of status.
And that is exactly why the international flight theory falls apart entirely.
Whoa, wait.
Let me explain the mechanics of why he was trapped. Because in 2015, you couldn't just buy a ticket and walk onto an international flight undetected.
Right, the APIS system.
Exactly. The airline industry operates on APIS, the Advanced Passenger Information System. The moment a gate agent scans a passport, that data is instantly transmitted and cross-referenced with Homeland Security.
Yeah, the hit would be immediate.
Even if the federal arrest warrant for unlawful flight hadn't been issued yet, his expired visa status would immediately flag him for secondary screening the second he tried to exit the country. He couldn't fly commercial. He was fundamentally locked out of the airspace.
See, I completely agree he was locked out of commercial airspace. Standard aviation was off the table.
Right.
But that assumes a commercial terminal is the only way out of North America. And that ignores how border mechanics actually function for people desperate enough to circumvent them.
You're talking about land borders?
Yeah, international borders are not solid walls. They are highly permeable membranes if you know where to push. The source material explicitly raises the viable theory of human smuggling routes.
Okay, but
We usually conceptualize human trafficking as a one-way street, smuggling undocumented individuals into the United States. But those exact same syndicates run in reverse. They facilitate exit for the right price.
But how does an amateur from Hanover access a reverse smuggling syndicate at 3 a.m.?
He doesn't have to do it at 3 a.m. He just has to get to a staging area, which Newark absolutely is. The metropolitan area surrounding Newark has deeply entrenched international connections.
That's true. He had visited his mother in New Jersey previously.
Right, in 2014, he has extended family and community ties in the region. Plus, he had his passport, and he had whatever cash he emptied from their apartment.
So you think he just hopped a train north?
If he uses Newark Penn Station to take an unmonitored domestic train up toward upstate New York or out to Washington State, crossing the Canadian border by land in 2015 was highly viable. The northern border has thousands of miles of unpatrolled wilderness.
You're seriously suggesting he trekked through the woods?
Or he utilized illicit land crossings via established diaspora networks. Canada has a massive South Asian diaspora where he could seamlessly blend in.
I guess so, but
And once he's on Canadian soil, flying back to India or to Ecuador, where the FBI notes he also has relatives, becomes exponentially easier because he's bypassing the US digital exit protocols. The US systems aren't scanning him on his way out of Toronto. Fleeing via a porous land border makes far more logical sense than risking a routine traffic stop in New Jersey for the rest of his life.
okay, but look at the inherent contradiction in what you're proposing here. We have to go back to the why.
The motive.
Yes. The psychological anchor of this entire tragedy is that Patel committed murder because he was enraged that his wife was planning their return to India. He vehemently wanted to live in the United States.
I know, but
If his endgame was to illegally cross into Canada, just to turn around and flee back to India, or to start over completely from scratch in Ecuador, he entirely defeats the psychological driver of his own crime.
the psychological driver shifted the second he committed the murder. The motive to enjoy the American dream evaporated the moment Palak died.
You think it just disappeared?
Instantly, it was replaced by a primal biological imperative survival. And survival meant putting an ocean or a heavily fortified border between himself and the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
See, I don't think it shifted. I think he doubled down. Newark Penn Station is a gateway to the American interior.
Sure, but to where?
He could have taken a bus to an agricultural hub in the Central Valley of California or a meatpacking district in the Midwest, places where the economy fundamentally relies on an undocumented workforce,
Okay, but
where cash is the primary currency and where absolutely nobody asks to scan your passport.
which brings us to the most massive obstacle to your domestic theory. It is the friction point that I just cannot get past.
The reward?
Yes, how does he survive for 10 years? We are not talking about hiding for a few months. We're talking about a decade of living underground. And hanging over his head is an FBI reward that started at $100,000 and currently sits at $1 million.
It's a huge number, I agree.
People listening to this are probably thinking exactly what I'm thinking. It's $1 million. Someone would rat him out. If Patel is living in a domestic enclave working cash jobs in the back of a restaurant, he's interacting with people.
Right, but
He's buying groceries. He's renting a room. Economic gravity dictates that eventually someone needs $1 million more than they need to protect a peripheral acquaintance. How could any undocumented domestic network withstand that kind of pressure?
because you're applying a purely conventional mainstream economic logic to a subculture that operates on an entirely different set of survival mechanics.
What do you mean?
Let's really drill down into how an undocumented underground economy functions, because it explains perfectly why $1 million is essentially radioactive money.
Radioactive? Really?
Yes. To claim that $1 million reward, an informant has to step out of the shadows and voluntarily interact with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Sure, if you are an undocumented worker or a business owner operating outside the tax grid, utilizing off-the-books labor, bringing federal agents into your life and your neighborhood is the ultimate taboo. It's an existential threat.
I see where you're going, but
It's not just about turning in Patel. It's about inviting an agency that shares data with ICE into an enclave where dozens of other people might face deportation, or where businesses might be shut down. The math changes completely when claiming the reward means destroying your own life and your community's safety.
But they wouldn't have to expose themselves to that degree. 10 years is an incredibly long time for relationships to sour. A landlord gets greedy, an employer feels slighted, a roommate gets suspicious.
True.
But all it takes is one anonymous tip, one phone call from a burner phone to the FBI's toll-free line. You don't have to give your social security number to drop a pin on his location.
A burner phone still initiates an active federal investigation in your immediate vicinity. The FBI doesn't just quietly grab the guy. They raid the location, they interview the neighbors, they audit the employer.
The disruption is massive, I'll give you that.
Right. But beyond the logistical fear of law enforcement, we have to look at the specific sociological context outlined in the source material. This was an arranged marriage.
Right. Introduced in August 2013, married by November.
Exactly. The communities facilitating these networks can be incredibly insular. We're talking about ecosystems where familial honor, deep-seated cultural shame, and collective protection mechanisms often completely override external financial incentives.
Look, I understand the cultural nuance, I do, but human nature is universal, and $1 million is life-changing capital anywhere on Earth.
It is, but in certain highly patriarchal traditional subcultures, the blame for domestic violence is often tragically misplaced or just hidden. The source material notes that Palak's own family had visited the U.S. in March, just weeks before the murder, to try and help the couple, quote, live peacefully.
Which points to pre-existing domestic issues.
Right. There's often immense, crushing pressure to keep marital strife internal. Someone shielding him right now might not view him as a terrifying FBI top 10 fugitive.
How else would they view him?
They might view him as a community member who made a terrible mistake in a moment of passion, a situation that is better handled quietly, internally, rather than by American federal authorities.
So in your view, how exactly does he function day-to-day for a decade without tripping a wire?
Through identity sharing and Hawala networks. You don't sign a lease, you sublease a mattress in a basement from a third cousin whose name is on the actual paperwork.
Okay.
You don't get a bank account. You use Hawala, which is an informal method of transferring money without any physical money actually moving, based entirely on an honor system.
Right, money brokers.
Exactly. You don't go to a hospital if you get sick. You go to cash-only clinics that don't check ID. It is an entirely parallel society. He could easily be completely insulated from the mainstream news cycle that's broadcasting that reward.
I hear the mechanics of that parallel society, and I acknowledge they exist, but I just can't accept that they're foolproof for a decade against the full weight of the FBI.
Why not?
The fact that the FBI has received hundreds of tips over the years, yet none have panned out, suggests to me that the people calling in are seeing ghosts. They think they see him at a gas station or a grocery store, but they don't, because Patel fundamentally isn't here. The absolute silence on the domestic front isn't a product of perfect community loyalty. It's a product of physical absence. The trail didn't go cold because he assimilated into a basement in New Jersey. The trail went cold because it went overseas.
And I maintain that the silence is the sound of a system working exactly as designed. The underground economy is built specifically to absorb people and erase their digital footprints.
You really think so?
Yes. His vanishing point at Newark Penn Station was a deliberate pivot away from international airspace and into the untrackable margins of the society he refused to leave.
Well, it is a profound disagreement on the core mechanics of evasion. We're looking at the exact same data points, the cab ride, the expired visa, the $1 million reward, and seeing two completely different survival strategies.
We are.
But as I listen to you detail the infrastructure required to hide him domestically, I think we've reached a very clear, unavoidable point of convergence.
Yeah, I think the one thing we absolutely agree on is the scale of the complicity. But Bhadreshkumar Patel could not have achieved this level of evasion alone. It's mechanically impossible.
Precisely. A 24-year-old donut shop employee does not evade a global digitized manhunt for 10 years on luck and intuition.
No way.
Whether an international syndicate helped reverse smuggle him across the northern border into Canada, or whether a deeply insular domestic network is currently providing him with unrecorded cash wages and shelter, he had significant coordinated assistance.
Right. Someone or multiple someones actively aided and abetted a murderer.
Exactly.
It requires capital, it requires logistics, and above all, it requires silence, which elevates this case from the story of a lone, panicked fugitive to the story of a shadow system, either an international smuggling pipeline or a domestic community protection ring that is successfully and actively defeating federal law enforcement every single day.
And in analyzing the mechanics of how he beat the system, we cannot lose sight of the tragedy that initiated all of this.
Never.
At the center of this complex web of expired visas, border security logistics, and FBI manhunts is Palak Patel. She was a 21-year-old aspiring teacher. Loved ones described her as deeply caring and kind.
Yeah.
Her motivation wasn't complex. She simply missed her family. She just wanted to go home. And that entirely relatable, fundamentally human desire cost her her life in the back room of a donut shop.
It is a devastating, senseless loss. And her story intersects with so many hidden complexities that we rarely talk about.
It really does.
It highlights the immense pressures of arranged marriages, the intense vulnerabilities of immigrants living on expired visas, and the often invisible crisis of intimate partner violence within communities that prefer to handle disputes internally.
Yes.
There is a vast sociological depth to this case that goes far beyond the mechanics of the manhunt itself.
Absolutely. We've laid out the strongest logistical arguments for both his international flight and his deep domestic concealment. But ultimately, the definitive answer remains out there, waiting to be uncovered by a single mistake or a single phone call.
Just one.
We will leave it up to you, the listener, to weigh the friction points we've debated today, consider the psychology of the escape, and form your own conclusion about where Bhadreshkumar Patel might be hiding.
Because until that one actionable tip comes in, until someone finally decides that $1 million reward outweighs the risk of exposure, he remains a terrifying anomaly. A man who managed to slip between the cracks of a surveillance state.
A man who walked into one of the busiest domestic transit hubs in America and simply vanished. Thank you for joining us. We will see you